This is Mark Shannon here from AMC. So welcome to Toronto, where AMC is exhibiting at PDAC 22. And today we're going to have a conversation between with Brian Hall, who's the author of Hill of Value and the Authority on Cutoff Grades. So allow the question and answer to begin, and enjoy. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Carl.
Hi. And this is. Hi, there we go. Yeah. As the originator of the Hill of Value concept, can you give us an idea of how that started? What were the ideas that really started you off on that?
Look, I've ever since I started as an engineer, even as an engineering student, learning there's lots of ways to generate an answer. There's no one answer, and yet so much of our industry is just a single answer. And as soon as we find something that basically everybody's satisfied with, we seem to heave a sigh of relief and implement that plan. But there's no guarantee that that's anywhere near the best plan. So I guess right through my career, I've always been searching for ways to look for better plans and ways of illustrating that. And the Hill of Value, in one sense, is not a new concept. I remember having a picture of a Hill of Value in my fourth year university notes nearly 50 years ago, just as a very simple two-dimensional thing. But I guess since then we've picked the concept up, and we had a project about 25 years ago now where a client was looking basically for our tick of approval on a single plan that they were looking at implementing, and said, well, unfortunately they gave us the nod, and that was our first Hill of Value project, but we weren't calling it that then. I guess we coined the term a couple of years after that, about 2000.
Okay, and it's really it's a process of identifying out of the whole field of potential solutions, what is the best strategy to be following?
Exactly. Yeah.
And what type of factors do you really consider in a Hill of Value assessment?
Well, any decisions that are going to influence the value of the project. So the sorts of things that typically come into it are things like cutoff grade, mining rates, ore production and treatment rates, sequencing of deposits or zones within an ore body, size of the mine, whatever we perceive within any particular project is likely to be a decision that people can make that's going to influence value.
And then how would you deal with things that you might make a decision about one circumstance, but there's other factors that happen, like price changes and that are out of your control. How would you cover that?
Yeah, sure. Look, very often we generate a simple Hill of Value. It's the features that live in three-dimensional space, but it's really a multi-dimensional problem. Mm-hmm. And the typical 3D Hill of Value that we present really is just an example of what's really going on in multi-dimensional space. So I guess one of the things that we always look at then, particularly with something like price, as you mentioned, is what happens if the price changes. And the typical sensitivity analyses that people do, those sort of spider diagrams, tell us that if the price goes up, the value of your project goes up. Well, that's an amazing discovery. But what we're more concerned about is, does that actually change your decision? And so we look at what happens to the Hill of Value as we look at different prices. Sure, the Hill of Value is going to go up, but more importantly is, does it move sideways in the or your off grade, those sorts of things. So anything that's unknown or uncertain, we can flex that way.
Okay, so how would you go about starting a process, and how long would it take to do an analysis like this?
Look, it varies. We say simplistically there's a 6-week process or a 6-month process. 6 weeks, it's probably more like 6 to 10 weeks. The 6-month process, you might start to see some results at the 4 or 5 month mark, depending on how easy it is. But then once people start seeing the power of the process, that then triggers all sorts of questions. And what you hoped was going to be a 6-month project, a real line under it, will then often be a case of, well, drill down, why are we finding these things? And it becomes a 12 or an 18-month process to answer all the questions that people then start asking.
But then you'd have a really good understanding of all the dynamics that are affecting your project, and
Absolutely.
really know what levers to push to get to certain results.
Sure, and that's in a very real way what it's all about. It's seeing how the various levers that you can pull are going to influence the value. And so, yes, the levers that you can pull, the decisions that you can make, all of those things become axes on that hill of value in multidimensional space. It's a range of hills and valleys in multidimensional space. And so some of them are decisions you can make, and some of them, like price that you've alluded to, are the things that you need to take into account to find a strategy that is robust as some of those uncertainties change. Sometimes we have people say to us, oh, look, we think this parameter is important, but we don't have the information. And therefore you can't model it. Well, our response to that is, if that's the case, that actually makes it even more important to model and find out, does the uncertainty, the uncertain parameter, does it make a difference?
Yeah, and find a plausible range where it could possibly exist.
Exactly,
Test all
yes.
of those.
Yes, test it right across that range. Does it make a difference? And I mean, the ultimate logic in all of that is the most uncertain thing in any of our analyses is the price.
Yes.
You wouldn't dream of building an evaluation model without the price. You flex it and see what it does.
Yes.
Does it change our decisions? And so the hill of value very much is decision-making information for senior decision makers.
Yes. And so at what stage would a hill of value exercise really add value to a project, or is it wherever the project sits?
Look, it's you can do one at any stage during the life of the project, but obviously the greatest value comes at around about the pre-feasibility stage, where you are really making the decision about what is the one option that's going to go forward into your final feasibility study that is then going to become the project that you build. And so that really is the time that you've got to get it right. But again, during the life of an operation, then people will still be doing long-term strategic reviews.
Yes.
So obviously, then a lot of things are already locked in, but okay, can we expand the plant? Can we expand the mining rate? Do we bring in another ore body that's off to the side or not? All of those sorts of decisions come in.
Yeah.
So we can still add value during the life of the project.
Okay, well, that's excellent. I suppose as you lose degrees of freedom as you progress down the project life,
Exactly.
your options are limited, but you can still
Very much
still
so.
a process.
Very much
Would
so.
you do that? Would you suggest people do that once and let it set and forget, or is it something that should be regularly
Look,
done?
it's certainly not something that is part of the annual planning process. We often have people wanting to do it as part of the annual planning process. We would certainly say that you should review your current strategy. And so very often that might be, if the models that you've got, if you can just sort of plug in the latest data, does it actually change anything? But depending on the operation, depending on what's happening in the market, changes in supply and demand, changes in prices, new discoveries that you're making through your exploration, those are the sorts of things that will potentially trigger the need for a new study. But the other thing that we would also then say is, because we are going to be looking at the influence of price, for instance, if you know what range of prices your project is actually robust for, you haven't got to panic every time the price drops a bit.
Yeah, you're still in a good position.
Exactly, you're still in that zone that you've identified from a thorough study up front, that the plan that we've got is a good project that is going to withstand price shocks. We find very often, if you optimize for a pessimistic price, if the price goes up, you pick up most of the value anyway. Very often the upside that you actually get by going for strategies that are based on optimistic prices or even base case prices, the additional gain then over the plan for pessimistic prices is actually relatively small. But there's then potentially a lot of downside if you get off to the left-hand side of the hill of value and you actually start dropping off the cliff.
Yeah, so you're looking for a robust position on
exactly. The hill. Yes, it's going to withstand a range of prices.
Okay.
So,
and so when AMC starts an engagement to do this with a company, how much interaction and how does AMC start in this with the client?
Look, it's very important to get everything out on the table, as high up the decision-making tree as possible. Now, I've had cases where working for the people on the mine site, for instance, they have their views about what's important and what's not, and what's possible and what's not, and the project sort of gets constrained to that. And then you take it up to the next level of decision maker who say, well, what about going down this path? Oh, well, your guys on site told me you wouldn't never go down that path. Oh, of course we'd go down that path.
Yes.
So
it's important that the expectations are
absolutely
clear.
yes, yeah. So it's really first of all getting out on the table all the questions that people think might want to be answered. Can you necessarily answer all of them at once? Probably not. But because you've actually then got them all out on the table, now you can start to decide, well, which ones do we think are more important? What do we actually need to bring into stage one? And then we can expand it to stage two. But the thing that we would then say is things that people often think are difficult are easy, and things that people think are easy are difficult. And so don't sort of constrain yourself. Don't hold back and think, oh, that's too hard. We won't tell them about that. We'll give that to them later. The number of times I've had clients say, oh, well, okay, no, you're definitely not going to have to look at this. You do the project and then, great, now let's look at this thing that you told us we wouldn't have to look at.
Yes.
Well, I've gone and built the model in a way that's actually made it very difficult to take account of that because you told me I wouldn't have to. So
it's really understanding the concept of
exactly.
What's possible.
Exactly. So if I know that I'm not going to do it now, but I might have to look at it later, we can build our evaluations in a way that makes it easy to add those things in later on.
Can you give an idea of sort of the scale? Because obviously we're not looking at one scenario and putting it there. We're looking at a huge field of scenarios. Yep. Can you give an idea of the scale of the number of scenarios you look at and how you approach them?
Yeah, look, it all becomes a question of combinatorics, because just about every decision that you want to options, price forecasts, there are multiple options. As soon as you start talking, for instance, about cut-off grades, and you might be talking about cut-off grades in different parts of the mine, one operation way back, one of our very early ones, we had 30 mining areas with 5 potential cut-offs that we were looking at, that we had data for.
Yes.
So the number of combinations is actually 5 to the power of 30, which in round numbers is about the number of seconds in the life of the universe as we understand it today.
Yeah, that's a good idea of scale.
That's a big number. Okay, so are we ever going to look at all of those? No, but we build the model in such a way, in modularized form, that any of those, if somebody says, well, what if we did this? What if we did that? The model will handle it and look at individual scenarios, but then look at the multiple scenarios that generate the hills. And so very often we'll generate thousands, tens of thousands of scenarios that we then look at through the various hills, and it takes some time then to get a grip of what it actually means, and then to summarize that in a way that tells the story for senior decision makers to not have to wade through all the detail.
Okay, and then what type of product does a client get from it? Is it a report, or is it a probabilistic range? Or
look, it's again, it depends on the project, and it becomes part of the specification. So a lot of the work that we've done up to date has been essentially deterministic. If the cutoff is this and the price is that, then there's the outcome. But just the very fact that we look at multiple prices means there's some sort of flexibility in there. So it's a very small step to say, well, okay, what if we've got probabilistic estimates of what the price might be? We can go right back even to the geological model and start looking at conditional simulation to say, well, you can sort of hypothesize, particularly say with a high-grade underground operation, if you start increasing the cutoff and you're not really 100% sure of where the high grade is at very high cutoffs, you could actually design a stope that actually mines pure waste and misses the high grade together. So you can start looking at percentile values of what the actual underlying geological resource might be with different realizations from the
So
concept.
that's a way of capturing all that extra information that comes from
Exactly.
from a simulated model
Exactly.
into a simulated geological model into
Sure.
a simulated mining model and financial model eventually.
Exactly.
So it just gives you find something to do with all that information that's in the resource.
Exactly. I mean, our mantra basically is if you can describe it, it can be modelled. So yeah, by all means, look for again, get all the questions out on the table, and any question that you ask is going to mean, well, somebody has to find the relationships. The Hill of Value modelling is very much a question of relationships. We tend to get our technical engineers beavering away, generating sort of 1 or 3 or 5 plans, and they do it in a fine level of detail. And what's the probability that one of those 3 or 5 is actually going to be the best? Pretty low. But if we put all our engineering thinking time into getting the relationships that the engineers are using as they are developing their detailed plans, then we can put that into a robust model so that all that thinking process is there. First of all, it's out on the table.
Yeah, and it's established for your model to reflect.
Exactly. Yes.
And I suppose, can you give an idea of the types of decisions that people have sort of had a realization of looking at your work and making decisions to change their operations or their projects?
One of the most of the key decisions we very often are focusing on cut-off grade, particularly in underground operations.
Yes.
And so typically we find if a mine isn't optimized for cut-off, that the cut-off is too low. And so they're typically mining material which is destroying value. In an open pit situation, we will typically find that the ultimate pit limits are too big, and the mining rate is too slow.
Yeah.
And so we will often be saying to people, you need to reduce the size of the pit, mine faster, so you can treat higher grade material earlier, and underground increase the cut-off.
So it's not revenue at all cost, it's making a margin on the material you do mine.
It's first of all identifying what are the corporate goals.
Yes.
And we'll have people say, we want to reduce costs. Well, that's fine. If you want to reduce costs, well, shut the mine.
Yeah.
That's the quickest way to save costs.
Yeah.
But we're not there to save costs. We're there to make money.
Yes.
And so whatever the various corporate goals are, we'll take multiple goals into account and look at the trade-offs between them.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So
thanks very much, Brian.
My pleasure. Pleasure. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
And thanks everybody. I'm going to pass over to Andrew here.
Yeah. Okay. I'd like to introduce Andrew Hall, who's our executive lead advisory, and Andrew, the Hill of Value concept, although some of the ideas are not unique, the whole crystallization of this into a service that we offer is something that's really born and bred inside AMC, and this is something that has recently been trademarked.
Yep.
And I suppose, could you give us a bit of an outline of why we did that and what's going on with the service into the future?
Yep, absolutely. Well, it's really exciting that we've officially trademarked Hill of Value in Australia and pending elsewhere. So I guess the key thing, Brian coined the phrase Hill of Value over 2 decades ago, and has spent the last 20 years developing and refining the process. So the trademark is strong recognition of AMC's ownership of the IP, which is something that we spent a lot of time, a lot of blood, sweat and tears developing, and it's really good recognition of that. The other thing is, people do talk about the Hill of Value around the industry, but there really is only one true Hill of Value process for strategy optimization, and that's the process that Brian developed and is handed over now. And so it's also, the trademark is really important to protect the integrity of our Hill of Value process.
Yeah, so when you hear the words Hill of Value, it is the original, the OG of strategy optimization.
And encompasses the full philosophy of what Brian's been developing, learning and imparting that knowledge on the rest of the team for such a long period of time. And obviously, we're all very grateful to have had that great privilege to have worked with Brian for so long. I'm extremely proud that we've now got a team of strategy optimizers that's now picking up the baton and securing Brian's legacy.
Fantastic.
It's fantastic place to be. So,
Yes. And yeah, there's more than enough information on our website to follow up. And it'd be great if we can meet you at PDAC. If anybody's here, it's at booth 448. If you're still in PDAC when you see this, but yeah, otherwise on our website there's all that information. Yeah.
Thanks, Carl.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you very much, Brian.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.